Today's podcast is brought to you by Audible.com. Get a free audiobook download and 30-day free trial at audible.com/drift. Over 180,000 titles to choose from for your iPhone, Android, Kindle, or MP3 player. Storytime is anytime with Audible.com.
Welcome to the Drift and Ramble podcast. I'm Steve Blizin. Each episode will explore true stories and American legends. From the pages of history and a few stories handed down over the years, we'll look at the people, places, and events that helped shape a nation. Stories of survival, notable frontier men and women, explorers who struck it rich, and the outlaws that stole it from them. There'll be studies of saloon girls, swindlers, banditry, and bad men, profiles of lawmen and American Indians, and the good and evil that existed between them. We'll amble through the past. We'll delve into the folklore of the times and maybe even uncover a ghost story or two. So, saddle up or settle in for the Drift and Ramble podcast. This is Season 1, Episode 6. At the height of the gold rush in 1849, thousands of hopefuls headed west in search of gold. Rainbow chasers, men with big dreams, all migrating westward with a singular purpose. While some travel over land, others travel by sea, thinking their journey to be easier than an overland passage into the unknown. What they find is their journey is no less risky, and the challenges that lay ahead will sort only the strongest of mind and body from the rest of the pack. In the previous episode, we were introduced to the Grosh Brothers, two young brothers from Reading, Pennsylvania, who traveled by sea to Tampico, Mexico, then through jungle, barren desert, to eventually meet the ocean again at Mazatlan, where they could continue by sea to San Francisco. They document their journey through a series of meticulously detailed, often eloquent letters home, each one tempered with a high degree of optimism and concern, for they do not want to worry their parents. If you haven't listened to Episode 5, I encourage you now to go back and listen to that first. Though their company failed and left them essentially stranded in Mazatlan, Mexico, the men arrive in San Francisco only to discover one of the brothers has become terribly ill. Their traveling companion, Dr. Martin, has died from dysentery. And though many are sick, most of their associates have now made it to the mines. Meanwhile, the Grosh Brothers were delayed nearly a year before they could begin their own search for gold. With the Reading, California Association going bust, the boys are duty-bound to uphold their contracts, and they cannot wait to be free from their obligations. After securing provisions and incurring a massive debt, Alan, the oldest brother, is ready to begin his first foray into gold mining, and before he can even leave the store, a flood comes through and he loses nearly everything. Yet, through it all, they never lose hope or sight of their dreams. While most of the fortune seekers are satisfied scouring the streams and fields of California in search of placer gold, the loose, flaky deposits that collect in small pockets, the Grosh Brothers are different. They are well educated and know that the placer gold is just the sign of a richer, bigger vein of gold somewhere nearby. The brothers are not dependent on finding gold, it's just that they would rather. However, they have spoken of many possible businesses with which they could be satisfied. They talk of horticulture, inventions they have made, and work at other jobs to raise money so they can mine. As we rejoin the brothers now, they have just found what they believe to be a very wealthy vein of ore. They have begun to stake claims and form a company of friends they trust to work the area, hoping that the riches they find will propel them in their new vocation, gold mining. They tell their father of their find and that they are now gold miners, but caution him not to speak about their find, as they are very careful not to divulge too much information about their potential wealth. Later in our story, we'll learn if the ore they've found is the answer to their prayers, and how it all connects to the Comstock Lode, America's richest silver strike. We'll meet the man the lode was named for, and how his name became associated with the find. We'll also meet an interesting young man by the name of Samuel Clemens, who comes to town with no decided vocation, but leaves as Mark Twain. Meanwhile, the Grosh Brothers continue to work on their claims. One night, while in their cabin, they wake to hear what first sounds like coyotes in the night.
June 7th, 1851, Sugarloaf Mines, El Dorado County, California. Dear Father, we had an alarm Wednesday night just after the lights were all blown out. We heard a noise resembling the cry of a coyote, which we at once pronounced an imitation. In a few moments, our black mule snorted out an alarm. Alan looked out, saw nothing, then lay down, waiting for another alarm. In a few minutes, the mule snorted again. This animal is invaluable because she rarely gives a false alarm, but is always sure to give one if anything comes near at night. Alan then got up, alarmed the rest, and two went out to reconnoiter. In a few minutes, they found signs of Indians. We ran down with double-barreled guns loaded with slugs for another look around, suspecting some bushes. I fired one barrel into them and roused an Indian in another direction. Steele, the one with us, raised his gun, but it misfired, so the fellow got off. We immediately tied the animals near the cabin and set a watch. We heard occasional signs in the distance during the night, but nothing alarming until just about daylight. The black mule snorted and pointed to some bushes about 100 or 200 yards from the cabin. Steele, a brave but rather rash fellow, advances without calling the rest of us. When he was within 50 yards, an arrow passed through a serape he wore. It went through his coat and shirt and passed under his arm without touching him. He threw his gun to his shoulder as another grazed him in the arm and fired a load of slugs at the bush and rushed on. As he reached the bush, he fired again with what effect we were unable to discover. This closed the affair. We prepared for an attack the next night by fortifying the cabin, determined to keep it instead of going out, which worked but was dangerous in general. They came around again at night, but finding us alert, kept a respectful distance. Last night was undisturbed. Since we know our danger, we are so well prepared that our risk is very slight. We at first believed it to be Indians in the neighborhood and marched the next morning after the first attack against a rancheria near us. But on reconnoitering, we found them perfectly unsuspicious of danger, chatting and laughing. We concluded that we were mistaken, so we walked into the rancheria to the astonishment of men, women, and children. But on our stating the reason for our appearance, they were very much frightened. After talking with them for a while, we found every moment fresh reasons for supposing them innocent. After a while, they came to our camp and assisted us in searching out the traces of our besiegers. By tying our animals around the cabin, we are sure of warning, especially since our black mule is a Sonoran, and therefore used to Indian attacks and snorts as loud as a trumpet. We are so situated that we can hold out against any number. We are 4 and thoroughly armed, having 2 shotguns of large bore, one of them double-barreled, 3 rifles, 1 large Colt's revolver, 1 small pistol, my carbine, which is almost as good as a revolver, besides knives and such things in abundance. I have given you so full a statement that you know the exact danger which you will doubtless still exaggerate, as you don't know the cowardice and ignorance of most of our Indians and their fear of whites. Few of them have anything but bows and arrows, so our danger is not as great as you will probably apprehend, notwithstanding my full and careful account. We will take good care. Your affectionate son, Hosea.
While most of the prospectors scouring the streams and hillsides of California are merely seeking placer gold, the Grosh Brothers know better than to place their faith in this kind of effort. For they know that gold runs in rich deposits in the earth, and that paltry placer deposits are simply runoff from a bigger source. The boys begin a methodic, systematic approach to seeking out rich veins of ore. Along the way, they develop better sluices and improve their knowledge of chemistry and geology in the hopes this will serve them well. Years go by, and they endure many hardships, but they are absolutely resolute in their determination to find gold or silver. Certainly they continue to prospect like everyone else, but they are extremely cautious not to disclose much about their finds to anyone. Even their family isn't provided with full detail. Though they work various claims throughout California, they ultimately head to Utah Territory, where they think they might have better luck. The area is now known as Nevada, and while it's called by many names, we now know it to be the area around Gold Hill and American Ravine. Alan boldly states he doesn't think they'll ever return to California again.
July 31st, 1853. Mormon Station, Carson Valley, Utah Territory. Dear Father, we arrived here after a very pleasant trip yesterday night. All well. We will tomorrow start again, and I think we will find something worthwhile. Diggings have been discovered on the East Fork of Carson River, and if we cannot do better, we will go there. I don't think we will go back to California. Our kindest wishes and warmest love is all we can send you now, but we'll write at length within 2 weeks, giving a detailed account of our journey and the country. Affectionately and truly, your sons, E.A. and H.B. Grosh.
In his brief note home, Alan establishes that they are operating in the area near the famous Comstock Lode. But how near is anyone's guess. But things clearly haven't gone the way they'd expected, and they return to California. This is one of the longest gaps between these letters, but the brothers remain utterly confident in what they are doing. Listen as Alan apologizes for the lack of communication.
November 8, 1854, Little Sugarloaf, El Dorado County, California. Dear Father, we are once more in California. After passing through trials and hardships which 5 years ago would have sent us to our graves, I am happy to say our healths are entirely reestablished. We find things here but little altered, and we have every prospect of a profitable winter's work before us, in which case Hosea will be home in spring. We are engaged now in a thorough, complete, and systematic prospect of our section and will continue it until the rains, and we think that in another winter we will have our piles. We found on our arrival here a letter from you, enclosing one from Vine and another from Vine. We will send this by the first opportunity and follow it up with answers to your and Vine's letters, and by sketches of our life in Utah as fast as our leisure will allow us to fill them out. If we have disappointed you in our promised visit, we make what reparation we can by a diligent correspondence. Warmest love to all. Truly and affectionately, your son, E. A. Grosh.
We'll continue with our story in a moment, but first, I want to tell you about our sponsor, Audible.com. You know, audiobooks are the fastest-growing segment of the publishing industry for the past couple of years, and the industry is experiencing more choice in titles and options to hear those titles than ever. Audible.com is the largest source of audiobooks available. Even car manufacturers have jumped on the bandwagon, with many 2016 model vehicles offering direct access to audiobooks. You can get them on your phone, your tablet, even your Alexa-based devices. And because you've taken the time to listen to our podcast, I want to tell you how to take advantage of Audible.com's free audiobook download with a free 30-day trial to give you the opportunity to check out their service. Here's the deal. You can choose any title. The length or cost doesn't matter. There are over 180,000 titles to choose from. The hardest part will be choosing just one. You can find all the classics, best-selling thrillers, new and upcoming authors, zombie apocalyptic themed romance novels, true crime, sci-fi, history. Well, whatever you're into, there's a title for you. To download your free audiobook today, go to audibletrial.com/drift. Again, that's audibletrial.com/drift for your free audiobook. As we rejoin the Grosh Brothers, a few more years have passed, and now they return to Gold Canyon in the Utah Territory. Gold Canyon is often referred to in the letters as Gold Cannon. This area is close to the area now known as Virginia City, Nevada. Alan is writing his father to let him know they have returned to the area on the advice of an associate.
June 8, 1857, Gold Canyon, Utah Territory. Dear Father, we left Mud Springs on the morning of May 23rd and arrived here on the 27th at midday. We were parts of 2 days in snow, but did not have trouble from it. We struck the vein without much difficulty, but find some in tracing it. We have followed 2 chutes down the hill, have a third traced positively, and feel pretty sure that there is a fourth. Gold Canyon is at present mad with prospecting fever. 2 or 3 parties will soon start out in search of rich gold diggings reported to have been struck during the prospecting rage in California in 50, 51, and 52. There is no telling what will be the result. Mr. Luget returns to California tomorrow, and we send this hasty note by him. We will try and let you have full information by 1st of July steamer. In haste, your sons, Alan and Hosea. Indeed, they do discover what promises to be a very profitable venture and plot out several claims. With no registry nearby in which to stake their claims, they hold the information as a closely guarded secret. Listen as Alan describes what's happened to their friend and partner, a man named George Brown, who was murdered by vigilantes. Alan tells his father the tragic news, and also that Hosea has had an accident. August 16, 1857, Gold Canyon, Utah Territory. Dear Father, we have determined almost positively the crossing of 2 silver veins has caused a large quantity of iron ore to come together as it has at this point. The Frank vein we had struck many 100 yards from this crossing, and it exhibits rich specimens of galena. Another vein, almost certainly a spur of our vein, or the Frank, we have struck just across the creek, does the same. We assayed a small quantity of galena from the last vein. The result was 5 to 1,000 silver, about $200 per ton, besides the lead. We have several other veins which are as yet untouched. We have great hopes, and are very sanguine of success. Sunday, August 23rd. We have written the foregoing hastily and at spells. On the determination of Black Rock, we immediately set about getting ready for gold digging. This required considerable preparation, as we had to prospect and get ready to haul dirt from where we might find it to the nearest water. Wednesday, Hosea hurt his foot seriously by striking it on the inner side just under the instep with a pick. He is now doing very well and has suffered but little pain considering the severity of the wound. It confines him to his bed. He will probably be helpless for 3 or 4 weeks to come. He bears it all with his usual patience and talks about how much worse it might have been had it struck a little further back or a little further front. In addition to this misfortune, we have had another. George Brown, our most intimate friend this side of the mountains, and one of the few right good men in Utah, has been murdered at Gravely Ford on the Humboldt by a train of bloodthirsty, Indian-murdering Arkansans who accused him of stealing cattle. He and 2 others, Thomas and John Jones, were there as traders with the immigrants.
We will, in relation to poor Brown's death, gather what information we can, and then as soon as we have a little means that we can spare, we will put this case in the hands of one of the best detective officers in California, a personal acquaintance. We are bound to go to the bottom. Love to all, affectionately, your sons, A.E. and H.B. Grosh. September 7th, 1857, Gold Canyon, Utah Territory. Dear Father, I take up my pen with a heavy heart, for I have some sad news to send you. God has seen fit in His perfect wisdom and goodness to call Hosea, the patient, the good, the gentle, to join his mother in another and better world than this. At the time of his death, I had gone to see a physician in Eagle Valley, some 14 or 15 miles from here. It was very sudden, unexpected, but very peaceful. Not a shudder, not a gasp, not a change of feature marked the parting of soul and body. He simply fell asleep. It was such a death as God blesses the good with. The immediate cause of his death was the wound in the foot I mentioned in my last. It occurred about the middle of the forenoon on Wednesday, August 19th, or Thursday the 20th. We were packing dirt from a small ravine to the right fork of the main canyon. I dug and Hosea drove the jack. We had brought no water with us for drinking, and becoming thirsty, it was very hot. I started down the main ravine for a drink. I met Hosea as he was coming back for another load and told him what I was going for and that I had not quite a load dug for him. On my return, he was sitting on the ground beside the dirt, holding his left foot in his hand. "I have done it now," he shouted as I came within hearing. And on my asking what he had done, he said he had struck the pick into his foot. "Why, how in the world did you do that?" I asked as I first saw the wound. It was a frightful gash. He smiled and said he hardly knew how he did it. Then he pointed to a large quartz rock laying loose on top of the ground just on the edge of the hole. Somehow, he said, I hit that. He would not let me carry him to the house, but rode the jack. The ground was rough, and the jolting caused him considerable pain. I dressed his foot. It was rather cold. He quieted my apprehension by saying it was the effect of the warm poultices. The poultice was warmer, a little, than blood heat. He felt it very sensible, and we both congratulated ourselves on the favorable symptom, as the poultice before had been warmer and he hardly felt it. He complained of being very sick just before I left, but felt no other pain. About 9 a.m., I left for Eagle Valley to see Dr. King and got what medicine I could, leaving him in the charge of Mr. Galfins, who came to the house a few minutes after I had left. I had not gone far before a feeling of uneasiness took hold of me. Twice I threw myself down behind a cedar bush, completely overcome with a great dread that it would terminate fatally. I prayed, oh, with what agony I prayed, that he would be spared, that the loss of the limb might be the worst. Dr. King was very kind to me. He gave me 4 pills of blue mass, which I took for fear of hurting his feelings, but I got 10 or 15 grains of quinine. It was dark just as I got back. Mr. Galfins met me a few steps from the house. "You must prepare yourself for bad news, Allen," he said. I was quite unprepared for the answer to my "what it is." "Hosea is dead." Oh, the terrible force of that blow. Oh, the utter desolation of that hour. What I said and what I thought I will not say. The world was nothing to me, and I envied the dead. But Mr. Galfin pointed out the necessity of courage and resignation, and as he told me of his quiet, peaceful death, I began to gather consolation from the blessed faith Christ died to give us. It gives me great pleasure to state to you that the possibility of one or both of us leaving this world had several times been the subject of full and free conversation between us. We had lived so much together, with and for each other, that it was our earnest desire that we might pass out of the world as we had passed through it, hand in hand. His hope in the faith you had taught us had robbed death of all its terrors to his mind. Earnest and truthful, patient and hopeful, he was to me a guide and support such as few men had ever enjoyed. One mind and one purpose actuated us in all we did. As I thank you, Father, for the dear faith that you have taught me, so will all your children, as they learn that one of their band has broken the fetters of mortality and flown home. With a thankful heart, I send love to all. Truly and affectionately, your son, E. A. Grosh. Hosea's death was sudden and unexpected. Alan must tell his father of this tragic turn, after which he must leave to officially register the claim, which he knew would make them rich. Though Alan and Hosea had the knowledge and the tools with which to assay their claim, there was no nearby registry with which to file the claim or his assays, so Alan heads for California, familiar territory where he knows he can trust certain people. Alan packs up all his important documents, including his assays, maps, and samples, and leaves his cabin in the hands of an associate named McLeod, who will stay behind to watch over the claim and chop wood. Another man who visits the cabin frequently, but is not so closely regarded or even mentioned by the brothers, is known by the not-so-affectionate nickname of Old Pancake, which masks the name by which the area would forever be known by in history. His real given name is Henry Tompkins Page Comstock, the very man for which the Comstock Lode is known. After Hosea's tragic, unexpected death due to lockjaw, caused by hitting himself in the foot with a pickaxe, oldest brother, Alan, now writes a final, confused and rambling letter to unknown persons explaining his predicament. He hints at his own fate, but true to form, he never once mentions the great wealth which he has kept secret from so many for so long. December 12, 1857, Blind Ravine, Middle American River. Dear Governor and friend, we were snowed in crossing the Sierra Nevada and escaped with only our lives. We were forced to take to the watercourses as our guides to our way on account of the thickness of the snowstorm. Our matches got wet and both barrels of the shotgun clogged, and we were obliged to seek shelter from the wind and storm on the lower ground, where we succeeded in saving our lives by burying ourselves in the snow. The next day, the storm still continuing as violent as ever, we were compelled to follow the river as the only means of knowing our direction. For 4 nights we were without fire and too cold to weave snowshoes. We buried our feet and legs in the snow and will probably save them. We are now in the kindest of hands and are treated as though we are relatives rather than strangers. We have been taken to the house of an Italian and a Chilean, and the only trouble we find is to prevent them from doing too much for us. We are indebted to them so much already, and in fact the whole settlement, that we feel we can never repay them. God bless them all until we can make a better return. My companion is a young Englishman, and though not yet 21 years of age, has shown the high Norman blood in encountering our difficulties and trials, which has enabled that race to keep its position as the governors of England, even into the present day. His name is Morris Buck of Sinai, Canada West. Morris's feet are worse than mine, as he thawed them out by the fire, as I wrapped mine up in blankets. I had not the energy to rub in the snow, for besides being without fire for 4 nights, we were without food for 3 days. I think that in 3 or 4 days I shall start for the Sugar Loaf. If Morris is able to go along, he will go with me. If not, I shall leave him behind at the best place I can find in the hopes of getting something to do that I can work at until my feet get well, so as to sustain us both if that is necessary. My Mexican doctor gives me great hope of a speedy recovery to the full use of my feet, but I fear he is altogether too sanguine. The ends of my fingers are very slightly touched with frost, and my wits end with fever, so that I feel very much ashamed at the confused note I have written you. But it must go, as I cannot write another. Neither of us can walk. Our friends will try to have us packed out to Michigan Bluff through the snow. We are 6 or 7 miles above Last Chance, California, and 18 or 20 above the bluff. We have had a very narrow escape of it. God's providence alone saved us. With this confused account, I must put you off until we meet. Until then, goodbye, all. E. A. Grosh.
Allen died December 19, 1857. F. J. Hoover, Esquire, El Dorado County, California.
Many years after the Grosh Brothers had died, a man named Samuel P. Davis wrote an article called Early Mining Discoveries in Nevada, in which he documents the humble beginnings of the Comstock and the Grosh Brothers' involvement. He includes a statement from a man named Johnson Simmons from Oakland, California, who claimed he had stopped at Last Chance, California, when Alan Grosh and Morris Buck had been rescued from the storm and brought to Last Chance. Take note that many discrepancies exist within these stories, as names are often confused, and the accounts are recollections made many years after the events actually occurred. Playing the role of Johnson Simmons is Bill from the Tattooed Bananas podcast.
I recall the time when 2 miners were brought into Last Chance in the winter of 1857. Some men were out hunting deer when they found the 2 lying in the snow where they were dying of cold and hunger. The one named Grosh never spoke after he was brought in. The miners carried them from the place where they were first found, as they were too weak to walk. Grosh, I think, lived about 3 days after being brought in. His stomach refused nourishment, and his legs were frozen. The other man we found pulled through, but they were obliged to amputate his feet. The miners then took him to Michigan Bar, where they kept him until spring, and then raised a subscription to send him to his relatives in Canada. Before he left for Canada, he told me of his trip. He said that provisions gave out after passing Lake Bigler, and their sufferings were terrible. They had the provisions on a pack mule, but there was nothing but small twigs for the mule to eat, and he became so weak they were obliged to kill him. After the mule was killed, he was cut up and portions of his flesh roasted. The meat was lean, tough, and unsavory, and only their terrible hunger made it endurable. They ate their last cooked mule on the banks of the Truckee River, and slinging as much of the roast meat as they could carry on their shoulders, they pushed on. They became so faint they could no longer carry anything except their blankets, so they ate as much as they could and threw the rest away. At that point, Alan Grosh, who kept his maps and assays through the journey, concluded to abandon them also, and so he tied them up into a piece of canvas and deposited them into the hollow of a large pine tree. McLeod said he never saw the assays, Grosh being very close-mouthed regarding them. All that he knew of them was that they were high in silver, and from a conversation he overheard, he believed them high in the thousands. The tree in which they were deposited had blown down in the wind, having broken about 20 feet from the ground. Grosh told him that it was safer to select a tree of that kind than a standing one, liable in a storm to be uprooted. The hollow in the tree was quite small, and after depositing the records, he cut a mark on the tree with his knife and rolled a good-sized stone in front of the hollow. The next day, there was a big snowstorm, and they finally threw away their blankets as they were useless from the wet, and their matches were useless from the same cause. After the snowstorm, it turned colder, and for 4 days and nights they wandered in the mountains, nearly dead and demented from exposure and hunger. At night they could hear the howling of the wolves, but none were ever near enough to attack them, and once they crossed the track of a bear. They finally sank down with exhaustion near some rocks, and Grosh said he'd rather die there than make any further effort. After giving themselves up for lost, they heard shots, and McLeod roused himself and went in the direction of the shots. When he came on a party of miners hunting deer, he took the party to Grosh, only a few yards away, and they sank down alongside him. The miners carried the two to Last Chance, a camp nearby, and there Grosh died after a few days, never having been able to speak. Had he been able to speak, McLeod felt confident he would have made a statement relative to his discoveries.
In the following excerpt, Samuel P. Davis recounts his story of the Grosh Brothers and how they crossed paths with Comstock. Today, we know the Comstock Lode as America's richest silver strike.
In 1857, E. Allen Grosh and Hosea B. Grosh, sons of Reverend A. B. Grosh, a Unitarian clergyman of Philadelphia, were working on the Comstock. From the testimony of many miners who knew them, they were men of considerable scientific attainments, being chemists, assayers, and metallurgists. In addition to all of this, having quite an outfit of assaying implements, they also brought with them to a spot afterward occupied by the Trink Mill quite a formidable library of scientific works. Captain Gilpin and George Brown were also regarded as partners of the Grosh Brothers. They went to the Comstock region from Mud Springs, California in 1857 and prospected for nearly a year. When they came across a young man named McLeod, they took him along with them. He was a Canadian, about 20 years of age, and had crossed the plains with some Mormon immigrants. The Mormons, who were the early settlers of Nevada, wanted McLeod to remain with them, but he declined to accept their religion, and so cast his fortunes with the miners. The Grosh brothers occupied the cabin along with young McLeod and a man named Henry Tompkins Page Comstock, also known as Old Pancake, after whom the ledge was named, who was also a frequent visitor to their little home. There is no authentic record of any assay made by the Grosh brothers, but they had the necessary appliances for the work and must have made the assay, for in the fall of 1857 they told Comstock that they knew of rich silver mines in the vicinity and were going back to Philadelphia to secure capital to work them. They at once staked off several claims, but there being no mining district there at the time, naturally they could not have recorded them. They asked Comstock to remain at their cabin during the winter with McLeod, who had been engaged to cut wood and take care of the cabin until they returned. In the spring of 1858, Henry Comstock learned that Allen Grosh was dead and concluded to take advantage of the knowledge he had acquired. The partner of Grosh claimed afterward that Comstock ransacked the cabin for papers and data and was thus enabled to relocate the ledge.
It is not probable, however, that such was the case, as the Grosh brothers did not trust him with anything. Nor was it likely that they left anything in the cabin that would benefit him. After they left, he probably went over the ground where he had seen them prospecting and located the likeliest places. When the miners came in the spring, Comstock was on deck claiming everything, and in that same year, 1859, he was deeding ground to the newcomers and sold the burning Moscow mine, which seems to have been the second location on the Comstock, the Ophir mine being the first. The first deed given by Comstock, and probably the first ever recorded on the ledge, was for the paltry consideration of $40, and the next one was for $30. The Virginia mine, or middle lead, commonly known as the Red Ledge, and lying parallel and adjoining the Comstock on the west, and the Black Ledge on the east, was brought into prominence in 1859 by the burning Moscow discovery, which developed a body of ore as rich as any ever found in the district before or since. It contained native silver and free gold in large quantities. Among other locations made by Henry Comstock in the Virginia district was one on the Red Ledge and was officially recorded on June 27, 1859.
Henry Comstock and several others laid claim to several sections of the Comstock Lode in 1859. James Finney, better known as Old Virginny, discovered the Gold Hill outcropping. Big French John Bishop, Alec Henderson, and Jack Yount discovered a vein that would later become part of the Comstock Lode, but not the main one. These four men have often been credited with the rediscovery of the original Grosh Brothers find. Many versions of how Comstock bamboozled his way into history exist. The most popular is that he simply bullied his way into the claim when two others actually made the find. In the spring of 1859, two Irish miners named Peter O'Reilly and Patrick McLaughlin began to work the area around the head of 6 Mile Canyon. By June, they had hit pay dirt, but when Comstock learned of the find, he claimed the men were working on land he had already claimed. Comstock threatened that he would take the claim, but the miners finally agreed to give him an interest in the gold find. As the legend goes, Comstock was a scoundrel and a thief at worst, and an opportunist at best. And Samuel P. Davis suggests Comstock would most likely have not had access to any documents or maps made by the Grosh brothers, as the boys were careful not to share the information, even with family. We know this much to be true from their own letters home. The fact that Henry Tompkins Page Comstock was associated with the find was, in all probability, due to his previous knowledge of the Grosh brothers and simply being in the right place at the right time. But Comstock had, in fact, filed two claims, which gave him the documentation the Grosh brothers lacked. In the years that followed the discovery of the lode, the Grosh family tried to sue to regain what they believed to be their rightful claim to the mines, but it was an impossible battle given the virtually unlimited resources of the company now in full control of Comstock's claims and the financial burden a case like this would cause. However, the court case did cause the Grosh family to keep and preserve the letters of Alan and Hosea, as they became court records for a time. Though there is no doubt that the Grosh brothers were excited by their discoveries, there are simply no records to support anything of these finds. But perhaps, somewhere in the Sierras, in the hollow stump of a fallen tree, high above Last Chance, California, lie the undiscovered remains of Alan Grosh's assays and samples. And what became of Old Pancake? As it turned out, Comstock sold his claim for what he perceived to be a huge profit, a measly $10,000. He didn't keep the money long. He spent it up almost as fast as he received it, and he left the area broke in 1862. Realizing that he had grossly undersold himself, Henry Tompkins Page Comstock went to Oregon and continued prospecting. Fed up and frustrated, he finally took his own life. On September 27, 1870, he put a gun to his head and shot himself. Another tragic ending in the harrowing addiction to find riches in the ground. Meanwhile, the area around Mount Davidson, the site of the Comstock Lode, gave up some $500 million in gold and silver. Virginia City exploded into a boom town and eventually became one of the most influential political, financial, and social hubs in the American West. With news of the Civil War ramping up, a young riverboat captain decides to accompany his brother out west. He arrives in Virginia City in 1861, after having assisted his brother Orion's position as the first and only secretary to the Nevada Territory. The young man, named Samuel Langhorne Clemens, wasn't really sure what to do with his life. He had tried a number of vocations, none of them leading to success, and so he began working in the mines of Virginia City with comedic results. Here is Samuel Clemens in his own words from his book Roughing It, in which he describes a turning point that ultimately leads him to becoming known as Mark Twain. Finnius, from the Tattooed Bananas podcast, plays the role of a young Samuel Clemens.
What to do next? It was a momentous question. I had gone out in the world to shift for myself at the age of 13. I had gained a livelihood in various vocations, but had not dazed anyone with my successes. Still, the list was before me, and the amplest liberty in the matter of choosing, provided I wanted to work, which I did not. I had once been a grocery clerk for one day, but had consumed so much sugar in that time that I was relieved from further duty by the proprietor, who said he wanted me outside so that he could have my custom. I had studied law an entire week, and then given up because it was so prosy and tiresome. I had engaged briefly in the study of blacksmithing, but wasted so much time trying to fix the bellows so that it would blow itself that the master turned me adrift in disgrace and told me that I would come to no good. I had been a bookseller's clerk for a while, but the customers bothered me so much that I could not read with any comfort, and so the proprietor gave me a furlough and forgot to put a limit to it. I clerked in a drugstore part of a summer, but my prescriptions were unlucky, and we appeared to sell more stomach pumps and soda water, so I had to go. I had made of myself a tolerable printer, under the impression that I would be another Franklin someday, but somehow had missed the connection thus far. There was no berth open in the Esmeralda Union, and besides, I had been such a slow compositor that I looked with envy upon the achievements of apprentices of 2 years' standing, and when I took a take, the foremen were in the habit of suggesting it would be wanted sometime during the year. I was a good average St. Louis and New Orleans riverboat pilot, and by no means ashamed of my abilities in that line. Wages were $2.50 a month, and no board to pay, and I did long to stand behind a wheel again, and never roam any more. But I had been making such an ass of myself lately in grand eloquent letters home about my blind lead and European excursion, that I did what many a poor and disappointed miner had done before, and said, "It's all over with me now, and I will never go back home to be pitied and snubbed." I had been a private secretary, a silver miner and silver mill operative, and amounted to less than nothing in each end now. What to do next? I yielded to Higby's appeals and consented to try the mining once more. We climbed far up on the mountainside and went to work on a little rubbishy claim of ours that had a shift on it 8 feet deep. Higby descended into it and worked bravely with his pick till he had loosened up a deal of rock and dirt. And I went down with a long-handed shovel, the most awkward invention yet contrived by man, to throw it out. You must brace the shovel forward with the side of your knee till it is full, and then with a skillful toss throw it backward over your left shoulder. I made the toss and landed the mess just on the edge of the shaft, and then it all came back on my head and down the back of my neck. I never said a word, but climbed out and walked home. I inwardly resolved that I would starve before I would make a target of myself and shoot rubbish at it with a long-handled shovel. I sat down in the cabin and gave myself up to solid misery, so to speak. Now, in pleasanter days, I had amused myself with writing letters to the chief paper of the territory, the Virginia Daily Territorial Enterprise, and had always been surprised when they appeared in print. My good opinion of the editors had steadily declined, for it seemed to me they might have found something better to fill up with than my literature. I had found a letter in the post office as I came home from the hillside, and finally I opened it. Eureka! I never did know what eureka meant, but it seems to be as proper a word to heave in as any when no other that sounds pretty offers. It was a deliberate offer to me of $25 a week to come up to Virginia and be the city editor of the Enterprise. I would have challenged the publisher in the blind lead days. I wanted to fall down and worship him now. $25 a week. It looked like a bloated luxury, a fortune, a sinful and lavish waste of money. But my transports cooled when I thought of my inexperience and consequent unfitness for the position, and straightway, on top of this, my long array of failures rose up before me. Yet if I refused this place, I must presently become dependent upon somebody for my bread, a thing necessarily distasteful to a man who had never experienced such a humiliation since he was 13 years old. Not so much to be proud of, since it was so common, but then it was all I have to be proud of. So I was scared into being a city editor. I would have declined otherwise. Necessity is the mother of taking chances.
Clemens began writing for the Territorial Enterprise, and it was here he would first use the pseudonym Mark Twain. Later in his career, Twain would write about his time in Virginia City. It is here where Clemens freely admits to his role in manipulating the stock market. Listen to local historian Joe Curtis as he describes the cavalier attitude by which Clemens confesses his part in manipulating the stock markets.
Samuel Clemens came to Virginia City in 1861, and he was here for 28 months. During that period of time, one of the things that occurred to him that he documents in his writings was that as a journalist for the Territorial Enterprise, he was often paid with stocks from various mines to put in the paper various bits of information that would today land him in prison for probably the rest of his life with insider trading tips. Want you to say this in the paper, and because we know if you say that, stocks will go up or they'll go down, and we can buy more and own more of our company. So the insider trading was very common.
Again, Finnius continues his role as Samuel Clemens with that very assertion of how he was so handsomely paid for planting stock tips in the press.
6 months after my entry into journalism, the grand flush times of Silverland began, and they continued with unabated splendor for 3 years. Virginia had grown to be the livest town for its age and population that America had ever produced. The sidewalks swarmed with people, to such an extent, indeed, that it was generally no easy matter to stem the human tide. The streets themselves were just as crowded with quartz wagons, freight teams, and other vehicles. The procession was endless. So great was the pack that buggies frequently had to wait half an hour for an opportunity to cross the principal street. Joy sat on every countenance, and there was a glad, almost fierce intensity in every eye that told of the money-getting schemes that were seething in every brain and the high hope that held sway in every heart. Money was as plenty as dust. There were military companies, fire companies, brass bands, banks, hotels, theaters, hurdy-gurdy houses, wide-open gambling palaces, political powwows, civic processions, street fights, murders, inquests, riots, a whiskey mill every 15 steps, a board of aldermen, a mayor, a city surveyor, a city engineer, a chief of the fire department with first, second, and third assistants, a chief of police, city marshal, and a large police force, 2 boards of mining brokers, a dozen breweries, and half a dozen jails and station houses in full operation, and some talk of building a church. The flush times were in magnificent flower. Town lots soared up to prices that were amazing. The great Comstock Lode stretched its opulent length straight through the town from north to south, and every mine on it was in diligent process of development. One of these mines alone employed 675 men. Labor and men's wages were $4 and $6 a day, and they worked in 3 shifts or gangs. And the blasting and picking and shoveling went on without ceasing night and day. My salary was increased to $40 a week, but I seldom drew it. I had plenty of other resources, and what were 2 broad $20 gold pieces to a man who had his pockets full of such an cumbersome abundance of bright half-dollars besides? Paper money has never come into use on the Pacific coast. Reporting was lucrative, and every man in the town was lavish with his money and his feet. The city and all the great mountainside were riddled with mining shafts. There were more mines than miners. True, not 10 of these mines were yielding rock worth hauling to a mill, but everybody said, wait till the shaft gets down where the ledge comes in solid, and then you'll see. So nobody was discouraged. Surely nothing like it was ever seen before since the world began. Every one of these wildcat mines, not mines, but holes in the ground over imaginary mines, was incorporated and had handsomely engraved stock, and the stock was salable too. It was brought and sold with a feverish avidity in the boards every day. You could go up on the mountainside, scratch around, and find a ledge. There was no lack of them. Put up a notice with a grand, eloquent name in it, start a shaft, get your stock printed, and with nothing whatever to prove that your mine was worth a straw, you could put your stock on the market and sell out for hundreds and even thousands of dollars. To make money and make it fast was as easy as it was to eat your dinner. New claims were taken up daily, and it was the friendly custom to run straight to the newspaper offices, give the reporter 40 or 50 feet, and get them to go and examine the mine and publish a notice of it. They did not care a fig what you said about the property, so you said something. Consequently, we generally said a word or two to the effect that the indications were good, or the ledge was 6 feet wide, or that the rock resembled the Comstock, and so it did. But as a general thing, the resemblance was not startling enough to knock you down. If the rock was moderately promising, we followed the custom of the country, used strong adjectives, and frothed at the mouth as if a very marvel and silver discoveries had transpired. If a mine was a developed one, and had no pay ore to show, and of course it hadn't, we praised the tunnel, said it was one of the most infatuating tunnels in the land, drivelled and drivelled about the tunnel till we ran entirely out of ecstasies, but never said a word about the rock. Occasionally we patched up and varnished our reputation for discrimination and stern, undeviating accuracy by giving some old abandoned claim a blast that ought to have made its dry bones rattle, and then somebody would seize it and sell it on the fleeting notoriety thus conferred upon it. There was nothing in the shape of a mining claim that was not saleable. We received presents of feet every day. If we needed $100 or so, we sold some. If not, we hoarded it away, satisfied that it would ultimately be worth $1,000 a foot. I had a trunk about half full of stock. When a claim made a stir in the market and went up to a high figure, I searched through my pile to see if I had any of its stock, and generally found it. My pile of stock was not all given to me by people who wished their claims noticed. At least half of it was given to me by persons who had no thought of such a thing and looked for nothing more than a simple verbal thank you. That describes the condition of things in Virginia in the flush times. Every man had his pockets full of stock, and it was the actual custom of the country to part with small quantities of it to friends without the asking.
Stock swindles were so common that no one seemed to be offended by the ruse, as they could often dump the stock on some other greenhorn just as easily. But making a bad purchase was only one way to lose when it came to stocks. Listen now as Comstock Mining Company's president and CEO, Corrado de Gasparis, as he recounts how if you weren't making money by owning stock, you may have to pay, due to something called an assessment.
So there were stamps on the back of the stock certificate all the way down. And so it was like dividend, dividend, dividend. And then it said, he goes, we call this an Irish dividend. And he said to me, right, and I'm like, what is that? He goes, it's an assessment. At the time, if you were a stockholder and you were making money, you got dividends. But if you weren't making money, you had to pay. Like they could actually assess you, and you legally had to put in more money or lose your right.
Next time on the Drift and Ramble podcast, our final installment from our trip to Virginia City. We start with a look at gunfights and gunfighters. How some men lived and died by the gun might sound an awful lot like what we hear about in the headlines today. We learn about the worst mining disaster of the Nevada Territory and why it might be the cause of some of the reported hauntings at the Gold Hill Hotel. We'll talk to a reluctant waitress about why she doesn't like the employee parking lot there, and I'll share with you the experience we left out of our Bodie podcast and how it connects to our visit at the Gold Hill Cemetery. That's all coming up next time on the Drift and Ramble podcast. I'd like to thank the Tattooed Bananas podcast for letting us borrow Finnius and Bill. I'd also like to thank local historian Joe Curtis for being so gracious to allow us to record his presentation at the Gold Hill Hotel. And a special thanks to Corrado de Gasparis, President and CEO of Comstock Mining Company. I'd like to thank Kathy Weiser Alexander and legendsofamerica.com. The article by Sam Hill was posted there and deeply edited by Kathy Weiser Alexander. If you enjoy our podcast, be sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. And please take time to leave us a review on iTunes. By all means, support our sponsors and perhaps consider becoming one yourself. You can visit our website at driftandramble.com for details on how to get in touch with us. You can like us on Facebook and follow us on Twitter. Until we meet again, I'm Steve Blizzin. See you at the next installment of the Drift and Ramble podcast.
Hi, this is Cheryl. Your feedback is important to us. If you have a comment or suggestion, we'd really love to hear from you. You can contact us through our website, that's driftandramble.com. You'll see a listener survey button on every page, and we'd really appreciate your input on the survey. Please take a few moments to complete it, and you'll have our thanks in return.
While there are vast riches in the history of the Comstock Lode, the letters of the Grosh Brothers may be one of the most important treasures. These letters would not be possible to share with you had it not been for the careful preservation of the Grosh family, the Wegman family, and their descendants. The letters survived house fires, court cases, time, and the many times they changed hands and traveled about. It's a marvel they exist at all, let alone the fact that they exist where we can find them. And so, in addition to the praise and thanks the family deserves, the Nevada Historical Society is also to be thanked for pursuing these important documents for the benefit of our knowledge and consumption. Society members Eric Moody and Mella Harmon first conceptualized doing a book in 1997, and eventually the task of editing, compiling, and decoding, if you will, these important fragments of history fell to Ronald M. James and Robert E. Stewart, who painstakingly assembled these documents into a cohesive, organized collection of not only the journey and personal history of these two young brothers, but a glimpse backwards into time itself. The book they assembled on behalf of the Nevada Historical Society is called The Gold Rush Letters of E. Allen Grosh and Hosea Grosh, and I highly recommend it for anyone interested in the authentic history of our American West, the gold rush, or mining in Virginia City. The Gold Rush Letters of E. Allen Grosh and Hosea Grosh is published by the University of Nevada Press and available wherever fine books are sold.
The Drift and Ramble podcast is a Clear Voice Media production, hosted and produced by Steve Blizzin, with segment research and voice acting by Cheryl Blizzin. Additional contributions and content have been made possible by support from individuals dedicated to the art and science of storytelling and exploring the still fertile promise of the American West.
I'd like to thank the Pottern family for welcoming our podcast into the family and for helping us reach new listeners. How does it work? Just search the Pottern Family hashtag or follow us on Twitter, and you'll be introduced to other family members with podcasts ranging from full-cast audio dramas to comedy, movie reviews, full-tilt sci-fi geekdom, and everything in between.